Everybody, it's Dr. Nichols-Boyle again. So I'm here to take you through the rest of Irish history from 1801 through 1921 independence. The video recorder is not really happy with doing longer videos, so I'm going to try to break this into two shorter ones. And first starting with kind of leading up to the last one and how we were talking about the Act of Union and how that changed things and what led up to it. So again, trying to get a sense of what things are looking like and what the effect they had in later years. The idea that the Catholic Seminary at Maynooth was founded. I actually went to school there for a year, studied abroad while I was an undergrad, and lived there later when I was doing my graduate work in Maynooth town. And as a response to that, then they found the Orange Order, which is Protestant anti-nationalist or anti-Ireland having its own nation. And the Orange Order gets its name all the way back from William of Orange over 100 years earlier, who, in his invasion of England and James II, and remember, he won in Ireland at the Battle of the Boyne, and so they still honor him as kind of this victory and way back in the 1600s, and they still have these parades today in Northern Ireland particularly, where they dress up in their bowler hats and their orange sashes and honor that, and bands, and often march through Catholic areas, which, as you can imagine, does not go very well. It's more peaceful now. They have to apply for permits and everything, but honor this. They say to celebrate their culture and their heritage. Of course, the Catholic side would say it's a celebration of killing many of us in the past and our culture and heritage. So it does not lead to very good things. So I'll just show you a few quick pictures of that to give you kind of an idea of this history and how much is present today, and then we'll go into what happened after the Act of Union and some of the events leading up to independence in that time period where Carleton was most active. So here we have the St. Patrick's College, Maynooth, and then the part of it that is the seminary in 1795. Established in 1795, still there today. And this is the chapel that's inside there, the gorgeous campus and beautiful chapel. This is all the mosaic tiles that you'll see in parts of it. And also up here, you'll see different saints, a stained glass window, and then they have these beautiful wooden pews that also have little carvings on them. And they're set this way, facing each other, to for singing purposes. So when you had the seminarians all in here singing in the choir, the acoustics would make it beautiful and could echo everywhere. And that gives you a sense of the Maynooth part. And then to give an idea of what this Orange Order looks like today in parades and how they march. This is a more recent one of the Orange Order. And you can see, again, they have their bowler hats, they have their orange sashes. This is in Derry or Londonderry if you're Protestant, Derry if you're Catholic. And you can see they have City of Londonderry. Here is William of Orange, Grand Orange Lodge, and this is a representation of the Siege of Derry or Londonderry, where they won by starving, even though it was a walled city, starving out the Catholics. So they're still celebrating that today. And the Union Jack, or the English flag, is highly prominent in that as well. Okay, so that gives you an idea of what is leading up to it. And then we head on to the next big events. So there were some kind of, after the Act of Union, there was a little bit of rebellion, but this really did bring it under control for a while. And the most successful main next event was Catholic emancipation. So we already talked about the Catholic Relief Act, allowing Catholics the right to vote. The Catholic Emancipation Bill allowed Catholics then to also hold office in the government and in civil offices without having to swear that oath against Catholicism. And the person who really made this happen was Daniel O'Connell. And Daniel O'Connell was kind of the Martin Luther King of the day. He was extremely dynamic speaker. He had a lot of support. He was a lawyer and he was Catholic. And he would have these massive meetings where people would gather around to listen to him, with thousands of people. And he was very much supporting home rule, or the Irish ruling themselves. And he was getting a lot of support in the area. So the strategy, Catholic Emancipation Bill, they felt was the first step towards home rule, allowing Catholics to be able to have that voice in the government. officially. So the Catholic Emancipation Bill happened because Daniel O'Connell targeted this small area in a part of Ireland that had an incumbent Protestant older candidate who was not very popular. And this was after the Secret Ballot Act, that if I can get enough people to agree to vote for me as a write-in candidate, he couldn't be on the ballot because he's Catholic, as a write-in candidate, and win, then they'll kind of be forced to acknowledge Catholic emancipation and that take my seat. So this is a strategy, and he wins in a landslide. And then the British government have to make this decision: do they allow him to take his seat? In essence, they have to pass the Catholic Emancipation Bill to do so because he's Catholic, and by law he can't have that seat. Or do they say no and risk huge riots and outrage? There's already been giant celebrations about this, and maybe risk losing Ireland altogether if they say no. So because of O'Connell's great organizing ability and his popularity and his power, they agree to it and think, well, we keep them under control. It's only one Catholic person. There's not that many more. They're going to get elected. We can always keep them in the minority. We'll allow Catholic emancipation. So that works for a while, and then they're starting to still try to push home rule and trying to create Irish excellence, I would say, Irish or more Irish Catholic culture, and honor that kind of as separate from English culture. But then the famine happens, and the famine is what leads up to some of these massive issues here in not being able to move forward politically and physically, because it just decimates the culture. So the famine, part of the big parts here, is that one, it just physically causes deaths and immigration. So it just ruins the actual population in that way. And in America, we call it the potato famine often. In Ireland, it's usually called the Great Famine, or Angor Timor, the Great Hunger. And approximately 1 million people died, far more than the corona so far, and 1 million emigrated. And most of those emigrations were to America or Canada or Australia, New Zealand. So those kind of areas that still have huge Irish populations. And this is the kind of the beginning of that identity growing even more largely outside in the world. And we'll look more at that imagery and those kinds of things later. But this was such a big deal, not just because the potato crop failed one time, and the potatoes was a huge thing that they relied on. That's important too. Most of the other things like, their animals, milk, beef, eggs, all of that would mostly be sold, and then you would live on the potatoes because it was cheap. You didn't need a lot of land. You didn't need especially good land. They had pounds of potatoes like for every meal, and that was their major sustenance. So when that fails, 1 year you might be able to sort of handle it, but 3 years in a row, you really can't. So that is what leads to a lot of the issues. And then also the British response to it, which is still debated and discussed today amongst the Irish particularly, and feeling that the British should not do everything they could to help the Irish. Some were sent to workhouses when they couldn't pay and starved to death or disease. And at the time, British were sometimes exporting food that they could have maybe sent to Ireland. So there was a sense of not being supported in that way as well. And we will go more into this in our next major thing. But this is right around the time Carleton is writing too. He was affected by this, and it kind of stalled political things and this sense of Irish identity and really a whole generation of people. And I'll show you a little bit about the effect that it still has today in Ireland. So if we go back to talking about the famine section, which is a little bit earlier, some of this I will save for later. So we have the famine in Ireland, and they have a famine memorial all along the quays. And you'll see a little bit of this. This is in Dublin, right, along River Liffey that runs through Dublin. And these flowers people added later, but you can see the kind of the poverty, the starvation in their bodies and expressions. And this is a little bit more up close. There's lights up at night. You can also pay for a memorial here and have your name and gives to charity and things like that. And then they also have a famine ship here that's a reproduction of a famine ship, the Jeannie Johnston, that went to Canada and sometimes a little bit to America. And they actually never lost anybody on board it because they had a doctor, but that was unusual. The conditions were terrible on these. They often called them coffin ships. You would get together enough money to kind of pay for the children or somebody young and fit, usually to go. When they got money in a new country, they were to send it back to you so you could go next. But while you were there, you were all kind of shoved into the hold together. Often not enough food. Really terrible conditions where you're all living and eating and going to the bathroom in the same place without ways to clean yourself. So many people die from tuberculosis or flu, dysentery, poor nutrition, as this is a long passage across. So you can see this was a major issue in Ireland. So even those that emigrated, many of them did not make the journey. And to give you a sense of the conditions, this is kind of the bunks, with just like a teeny little blanket there, and people would be shoved head to foot. These are mannequins, by the way, in reproduction in there to see that. And then this affected Ireland as a whole and how they went across the world. So we have the Irish diaspora here. Diaspora is Irish people, that spread outside of Ireland. So to give you a sense, 9 to 10 million people born in Ireland have immigrated since 1700. That's more people than the population, right? The population of Ireland is around 6 million, 4.5 in the Republic, 1.5 in Northern Ireland. So more people have left Ireland since 1700 than live there now. And height of the Irish population was 8.5 million in the 1830s before the famine, so you can see how the famine decimated that. And the most recent recession, they're doing well now until COVID hit, about 240,000, that's a small migration, left from 2009 to 2014, and about half of those were college graduates. They called it kind of the brain drain. People with an education couldn't get jobs there and ended up leaving and getting jobs elsewhere. And to give you a sense of the impact they have for such a small island outside of Ireland, 1 in 4 British people claim Irish heritage, and 35 million Americans, the last big census 2000, where we talked about this, claim some degree of Irish heritage, and 80 million estimated around the world claim some Irish descent, to the extent that they now even have a Minister of Diaspora Affairs that tries to organize and talk to and connect people all over the world with Irish heritage. So that gives you an idea of kind of the extent of this one event had on Irish history and the world's history. And I'm going to stop there, and then we'll go on to the push for independence after that revived after the famine.